Hello everybody, welcome back to Gospel Studios, and today is a very special video, one that's been about a year in the making, and I'm very excited to finally present to y'all. Today I have my video for how I painted my Ossiarch Bonereapers Spearhead. Done smaller reels and content over the individual steps for this project, and the project is now completely done, completely finished. After lots of breaks and lots of figuring out different steps, time in between sessions. Thank you for everybody who's followed along with the journey so far. There's lots of steps I have not covered in the reels, so you're in the right place with this video today. With that, let's get into it. I assembled the spearhead as per the weapon loadouts that are specified in the Fire and Jade spearhead book, with one exception. For the harvester, I gave him the blades, the large blades, instead of the bludgeons. The spearhead specifies that you're supposed to run the harvester with the bludgeons and not the blades, but the blades, I mean, come on. They look too cool to not use, with the glyphs along the blade, and the glyphs match his little chest plate there with the glowing runes on there as well. So that was about the only change to the spearhead loadout. You can still run them with the same rules, it's just one exception to the WYSIWYG, right? So I assembled them that way. I did my usual method of cleaning up, scraping all the mold lines and sanding them off. Any areas that got too roughed up from the sandpaper, the sanding needles were touched back over with the Tamiya Super Thin as part of the final assembly process to get them all together. They were glued to the bases to start. I did my usual dunking in the substrate to get them their dirt. Some of them got the special cobalt blue glass rocks. I ended up not doing this on all of them because the rocks are cool in theory, but on the base there's not a lot of light shining through them, and so communicating what material they were supposed to be was a little difficult. So they got on the larger bases, but for the troops, I kind of just left it out. I'm okay with that. Not a big deal. I can save them for some other project, and I can always try and glue them back on top later down the line. After I got the basing handled and after I got the assembly all together, they were primed in black, and then I sprayed a very, very pale ivory, warm, kind of off-white color, most likely Wraithbone, from the top as a zenithal, and then as a third step, I took monastic, no, what is it? You'd think I know my paints by now. Absolution green, and put that in the airbrush, and then I sprayed that from the bottom to reestablish those nice spooky green shadows, and then it gives the bone color, I felt, a lot of atmosphere. And this green still shines through after we do the translucent steps with contrasts and glazes and so forth. So very strong atmospheric choice. I'm very happy I did that. And it also ties in very nicely to the dark mossy green swamp cemetery style bases. So the first one, of course, is the yellow bone. That's the most predominant bone of the Ossiarch Bonereapers. It's that main primary bone color that you see on the main parts, most of the face, most of the actual limbs. So we're going to start off with a base of sepia and dark umber washes. These are made mostly with inks, and we're going to add some of this Noosh weathering medium. This is going to allow us to apply it on in a nice contrast style, but then we're going to be able to wick it back off. In this case, I'm going to be using some makeup sponge wedges. So once we've got that contrast applied, we can wipe away selectively, mostly towards the top and on the top of the heads, revealing that bright undercoat. And then we can go back in with a dry brush of Screaming Skull and reestablish all the little raised bits and knobs. This is the end result there, looking pretty good. And so then we just go and repeat this contrast and wipe away process across all of the yellow bone, across the entire force. This took some time, so I had to preserve the wash for a day so I could come back and just do the harvester. He needed a lot of coverage. Dry brushing him is not going to be as effective, so we're going to take that same Screaming Skull and we're going to actually manually apply some nice texture highlights, adding in scratches, scuffs, really paying attention and letting ourselves have fun defining all those knobbly bits and ridges. The Mortis and Soul Reaper stands out from the rest of this force. Instead of having that yellow bone as his primary color, he's got all this black bone plating. So we're going to go in with Eons of Battle Black Templar mix. It's got some Leviathan blue and some medium mixed in there as well. So this will give us a nice cool black. Once that contrast is down, we're going to go in with medium gray blue, and we're going to do a overall dry brush, getting all those knobs, ridges, edges. Then we're going to take Gargoyle Gray, mix it into that same dry brush mix with the gray blue, and work itself up a little bit lighter, being more sparing and more upward facing with this round. After that, then we're going to take the pure Gargoyle Gray, and we're applying this manually with the brush now to the top ridges, edges, knobs, the cracks on his face. We're also going to start establishing some spectral highlights at the top of his rounded back plates. And we're going in with Deepkin Flesh, still keeping to the green. We're going to go and hit all the little dot highlights, the knobs of his knuckles, the maximum parts of his spectral highlights, any of the sharpest parts of his face, as well as all the little plates around his waist to give them some nice sharp definition. And with that, the black is complete. Since we're already looking at the steps that were unique to the Soul Reaper, let's go ahead and deal with his staff and that soul magic. I use Coelia Green Shade to give just a very gentle shading to the staff of his bone staff. And then we highlighted it up with some Ulthuan Gray. Afterwards, we got some contrast layers of Croxagore scale on the shaft pieces here, the connectors. Most of these were very diluted down and done in multiple coats to get some nice variation. I then took the soul magic there and I base coated all the raised areas in white to give us a nice bright undercoat for all the layers we're going to add, starting with Tesseract Glow. We're going to start this part off with a wet blend coming straight from his little totem that's the soul's being sucked into. And then we're going to blend it out with some Hexwraith Flame, going a little bit darker as we go. This part is actually connecting with the Tesseract Glow, as well as where the base of the soul actually connects with the blade. After the primary bone tones, the next largest and most common areas of bone were all these pale bone armor sections. I went in with a dry brush of Pallid Witch Flesh to start, and you can see I'm hitting all the areas, not just for the bone armor, but also some of the blue armor panels as well, and the banners. Going around just hitting all of these, making sure we get the start of some volumetric highlights. If your previous layers make the paint job too slick and smooth for dry brushing, start streaking and smearing, you can use matte medium to dull down all these slick areas, and then your paint ought to stick a lot better when you dry brush it on. For the bone armor, I made my own mauve mix of Torgor Rage Shade along with Nuln Oil and some medium. You can see I'm applying it to all the bone armor rims, making sure to get it nice and deep in the recesses, get a good tint and shade without dulling it down too much, and I just apply it all the way around. After it's dry, you can see it's got a nice matte finish and definitely sets apart tonally from all the other armor pieces, even though in this shot, the yellow bone has not been completed yet. After that, we're going to define it again with more Pallid Witch Flesh, this time taking the manual brush, and we're going in to pick out the highlights ourselves. We're hitting all the raised areas, all those little knobs and such, all the sharp corners. We're giving ourselves some really tasty definition while continuing to make the bone armor appear more pale and further separating it from the surrounding bone tones. Now for the part of the tutorial a lot of us have been excited for, the blue armor. I start out by mixing a glaze of Leviathan Blue Contrast with Glaze Medium, then I apply this to all the blue armor panels. And then I go back with a more diluted pass, get the broad inner pieces of all the panels, making sure they're very dark, but leaving all the edges brighter. The box art shows some very, very tight highlights just on the most raised and rounded surfaces of the panels. There's some spectral highlights there towards the most rounded parts on the top, some dot highlights, and then any parts of the armor panels that are a little beveled. The top shoulder panels are easy enough with just a simple stripe across the top that we can smooth out later, but for larger panels, you have to follow the most curved, beveled parts of it, or at least give a suggestion of it. On the panels for the shields, they get this cute little T shape on the top. For rounded parts like shoulder and helmets, you have to actually add a dotted spectral highlight, and we'll smooth that out as we go. Here you can see on the Harvester, these are the first base coats of the highlights, just trying to get placement right first. As I'm figuring out the placement for all the highlights, I went ahead and blocked in the white on all of the units.
Alright, so I got all the white blocked in on every single miniature. I mean, some of them were in different places progress-wise, but got the white, at least a first coat over everything, all the different blades and spear tips, all over the edges of any of the tabards, the little itty-bitty eyes, I dotted those too, and getting all the base coats on the blue armor, as well as the skulls, the glowing skulls. Even the big Harvester still needed his skulls picked out. So we got all the white down. I'm going to take just a little bit of a breather here, and then we're going to get back to it and start getting some base coats over that blue.
So now that all of our white highlight bases are blocked in, we're now going to go in and smooth them out with Calidor Sky.
So I go in and I just smear this Calidor Sky right over the top of the white, trusting it to give a bright base coat to the blue, but I make sure to stick still pretty close to where I applied the white. We don't want these reflections spreading out too far. These are glossy panels with sharp highlights that transition quickly into the dark. Here's all the Calidor base coat. You can still see the white shining through, so we get a bit of a transition into the dark. I then go in with Thunderhawk Blue. This is going to go over all of the edges of the plates. This is going to give us good definition on each shape of the plates and make sure that our eyes have an easy time telling what's going on. We're then going to go in with Fenrisian Gray, start reestablishing the brightest parts of the spectral highlights, hitting the edge as well as the core of each striped reflection. I then go in with some Blue Horror, and we're going to go even sharper with our highlights, staying within the areas where we applied the Fenrisian Gray and going very, very sharp. Remember, we want these reflections to be tight and have a quick transition from the sharpest, brightest parts on the inside of the reflection to diffusing out into that dark blue that surrounds. And so we're going very tight, again hitting the edges as well as carrying up into the stripe, if you will, of each of those spectral highlight reflections. You will want to make sure you use a brush with a fairly sharp tip and be sparing in your application. You can always add more later, but trying to cover up excessive layers is going to take more time and more blending. Speaking of blending, I go back in here now with a thin diluted layer of Leviathan Blue, going and redarkening some of the deeper parts of the plates and budging them up just against the edge of where that Calidor Sky is, starting to get that blend. Here on the troops, I went ahead afterwards and I got the last highlights of Blue Horror. You can see that some of them are a little strong and they need to be blended, again, like we said, so we go back over them with Calidor Sky. For all these plates now, if they're a little too shiny, you've got a little too much reflection on them, you can add some matte varnish and you can knock that shine back down so you can better see how well the reflections are translating. Here we're looking pretty good now. So this is basically a finished troop here. You can see the shoulders were nice and basic, but it's a good effect. The shield is covered as well. And so then we're just going to take this process and we're going to repeat it across all of them. So the troops look really nice with minimal effort on this. The larger plates on the Harvester definitely require more work and are trickier to get the placement right. But overall, the force is looking mighty fine. Hopefully this tutorial for the blue armor has been helpful for you. This is a step I really looked forward to figuring out and getting it right. So with all that blue paneling done, the last major bone feature and structure left on these guys to do is the aged bone. This color is mostly features on the larger models, the larger constructs really, so that's the Harvester and the Cavalry. So I went in and based it with Garyak Sewer contrast, just going over our primer coats. I then tried to go and dry brush this with some Bade Blade Brown, but I didn't like how it was turning out. It was dulling it and desaturating it too much, so I went in and reapplied Garyaks again, a little more diluted this time to see if I could at least keep the edge highlights. And then I tried going in with some Ushabti Bone instead. This time around, I applied much more volumetric and tight controlled highlights, keeping to just the raised areas, and this started working much better. After that, I took Karak Stone and started manually applying highlights, again pushing the volumetric highlights even more, keeping to those rounded tops on the rib cages. You can see here the tops of the ribs and all of the little nubs of the vertebrae. I went in with some Skeleton Horde after getting that Karak Stone highlight, just to get some of that yellow back, and you know what? I'm happy with it. I like it. We might have to change the finish again a little bit more, but I'm going to go in there with a highlight of the Ushabti Bone after this. Maybe establish more highlight of the Karak Stone first if I feel like I need to, but I think we're almost there. We're almost there. After we've reclaimed our yellow, all we got to do now is smooth out our blends and then go and get some sharp final highlights with some Screaming Skull. Alright, I think we've done it. Got the Ushabti Bone highlight here on these upper sections here. I think it's becoming more clear to me now that the area to worry about was not the edges of the various ribs, but it was the just volumetric highlights. I mean, this looks so much better and has such better focus and color than trying to worry about all the little edge highlights. I like this. We're just about done here. I'm just going to take this Ushabti Bone and I'm going to go hit the highlights on all the rest of the segments, and then we'll be done with this aged bone.
With all the major bone components done, it's time to start looking at all that cloth that's draped across our various units. Starting with the Soul Reaper, I'm taking that Croxagore scale that I'll be using for the whole spearhead, and I just start carefully applying it around where this cloth touches his waistline, and then as I get lower down into the broader areas of the cloth, I can start to go more ham and spread that Croxagore scale around more freely, just trying to get a mostly even coat and not blotch it. Same deal with this Mortek Guard Bannerman, just trying to get it all across the smooth surface of the banner, really tucking it down towards the bottom, especially on that smooth backside, and just making sure I don't touch any of the surrounding details with the blue. After that, we're going to highlight it with Cyberite Green and then Bright Pale Green, starting with the Cyberite first. This is just our general edge highlight. We're going to go hit all the edges, raised areas, folds, and then we'll go in with that Bright Pale Green to hit the sharpest areas at the tops of the folds and maybe some of the little tears and holes as well. We can't forget to highlight the holes. That's part of the texture. There we go. That's the highlights applied. Lastly, for any of the areas of the cloth that might need to be darkened down, we'll go in with Pterodon Turquoise, which is a darker turquoise, and we're going to keep this mostly to the folds. We can let this color the highlights a little bit if the highlights ended up going too bright in any areas, and as well as any cloth that is mostly cast in shadow like the inside of the Mortisan skirt. This is a minor detail, so we won't spend too much time with it, but for all the leather straps that the banners are hung from, I just went in with a basic contrast of Gore Gruntifer, one of my favorite leather colors. When trying to do the gold stitching on the banners, I tried going true metallic metal, but it just does not look right, especially at this scale, and I decided that I really did have to go non-metallic metal. Even though it's not one of my strong suits, I figured this would be a good time to practice. So I started off with a coat of Rhinox hide of great base, and then we go in with some Doom Bull brown. This is where we start to be more selective about where we place our highlights, going then into orange brown from the Monument Hobbies Pro Acryl set that was designed with Flameon, and then we're going in and we're being more selective. We're applying this to sharper highlights and leaving shadows. That's the important bit. You need contrast, so you need shadow areas and light areas and sharp contrast between. We then go into this bright yellow, this bright ochre, and we're going and we're applying more sharp highlights. We're getting tighter and tighter with the highlights as we get passed through, and then we're still making sure to preserve our shadows. The next layer up from this is going to be pale yellow, also from Pro Acryl, and again we're just taking our highlights and pushing them tighter and tighter, trying to get those reflective bands of light across the metallic tapestry threads. Now for our ultimate highlights, as well as our edge highlights, we're going to be using this bright pale yellow, also from the Flameon Pro Acryl collab set. And we're going to go and hit all the edge highlights and the absolute tightest bands of light, the very sharpest, shiniest points. Now, if you go too bright, or if you need to blend some of your areas better, you can do a wash down of the Doom Bull brown and go and bring some of that shadow back without going too dark, and this will help you to maintain richness as well. If you need more yellow like I did in some areas, you can dilute down some Agros Dunes and add more yellow back in, and that will help you to make sure that it still looks like gold and it doesn't start to lean into something like copper or very, very pale gold. We do want it a little sickly, but I think the end result was exactly what we needed. Now, after you do all these complicated and very fine detail non-metallic metal steps, you're probably going to want to clean up your banner. So I went in and did this with Sotek Green. This is close enough in tone to the Croxagore scale that it was good to clean up all the surrounding areas. And with that, the banners are complete. Next up is a straightforward but important detail on these Ossiarch Bonereapers, and that is the glowing skulls inside the constructs. I devised my own wash of Hexwraith Flame and Aethermatic Blue contrast. There also is some fluorescent green mixed in here too to really make sure you get some of that glow. So we're going to be taking this and we're going to be putting this straight over all of the skulls on the inside of the constructs that were base coated in white. We're going to make sure that we have a healthy covering over all of our skulls, and if the wash comes out too thin for you and it doesn't establish its color strongly enough on a single pass, go ahead and do another one. We're going to be highlighting back up afterwards anyways. We don't mind a little bit of overflow into the surrounding elements, but we still want to keep this pretty tight. While these skulls are glowing and spectral, they're not emitting a whole bunch of light. So we don't want them to look like they're just blazing little suns inside of the constructs. You can see after our special contrast spectral ghostly glow mix has been applied that those skulls are looking super spooky, but they're a little dark and a little green and not spectral enough. Plus, they've lost some of their definition, so we need to go back in and add some highlights again. We're going to take a small brush because we want to be as neat as we can here. And we're going to go back and pick off all of the raised details and some of the volumetric rounded foreheads of these glowing skulls. And we're going to make them look ghastly again. With the Uthlon gray, it's a nice cool bright gray that will lend itself to our green tones that we got on these skulls. Again, you want to be very careful here picking, especially on these smaller little skulls that are just barely exposed between places like ribs and teeth. We're just going to take our time, reestablish the glow and the bright highlights of all these little skulls. And then once we're done, you're going to have some very spooky souls trapped within these constructs. This spearhead doesn't feature a whole lot of metal, especially since I decided to do green blades for most of the troops, but I did decide to use true metallic metal for the large blades on the harvester. I mixed together Vallejo chrome, which is very watery, along with some Stormhost silver to give it some better body so that it'll stick and not run so bad. I then sponge it up and apply this in a gradual sponging technique, adding more successive layers, gradating out from the darker undersides up to the topmost edges and along the flatter upward facing parts of the blade, so we get a nice bright sheen. I then go back with Pro Acryl Payne's Gray. I'm going to use this as a nice cool blue shadow tone. I'm going to use this to establish some nice scratches across the surface so that we get lots of worn, beaten texture. And this is also going to be used to reinforce that undershadow on the lower bevel of the blades. I'm just going around picking all the edges with this. And then I go back with the original bright silver mix, and I basically underline every single one of those dark little scratches to look like there's light reflecting off of the bottom edge of the scratch. And then I just apply this to both blades. They look beaten and worn with nice definition, even for true metallic. For all the little bronze symbols and most of the shields, as well as the chest plate of the Mortars and Soul Reaper, I use these bronze paints to go in and establish a pretty basic paint job. Go in with a base coat of Runelord Brass to start. This is always a nice, strong, warm tone with good coverage. This is also going to go on all of the Mortison's little totem buckles that he uses to hold the totems on his belt. We're then going to give it a basic wash of Reikland Flesh Shade, let that dry, and then we're going to go highlight back in with Moonstone from the Scale 75 copper set. A good alternative to this might be Canoptic Alloy. And then we're just hitting all the upward raised edges and all the little knobs inside of the symbolic. And then, like that, it's done. Pretty simple. Because a basic true metallic metal paint job just would not make me question my life choices enough, I decided to go for a Power Blade style toxic green, maybe even spectral green gradient effect on most of the blades for the troops as well as the horsemen. I started off by giving myself a decent base coat with a white gradient into black on these blades, alternating the highlight positions on each side of the blade. Pretty simple stuff. And then we just go in with the Glaze of Carandra's green to get the mid-tone and start blending the layers together. Caliban green is always a good color to then reestablish the shadows while still keeping them green and darken them down sufficiently. Warpstone Glow, we now go in for more manual blends, starting to blend where that black was originally underneath the Carandrus, and we just need to keep smoothing out that transition more and more until it's a seamless blend. We're going to glaze over almost all of it now with fluorescent green to really give it that pop. I carry it all the way across the midtones and almost over the entire white area, leaving just a little bit on the edges. This introduces just a tiny bit of yellow element to it, looking very nice, very glowy, and then we just go and hit the whole thing with a full edge highlight of bold titanium white to get that nice power blade definition and effect. Purposely leaving some empty sections there where I want to introduce some scratches. I then go back afterwards and manually carry the bottom edge of these scratches out. This gives the blades a nice worn look, almost like stone or crystal. I thought it was very appropriate and necrotic for these guys. We then can go in with some dark Caliban green to add some sharp shadows into those scratches, just like we use the Payne's Gray on the silver blades of the Harvester. Absolution Green was my original go-to plan for base coating all of these blades, and I ended up using that for all the blades that I eventually became too lazy to do. Now, the blade of these Mortars and Soul Reaper was a different story. This is the HQ, and so I wanted to do something special with him. I didn't get the initial steps for the non-metallic green that I did, but these are the colors I used. Dark Jade going into Coblite Green, Pale Bright Green, and then bright pale yellow into a final bold titanium white, with absolution green as some of the blending glaze. Now, I am adding a couple more highlights just so you can see the process, because I felt like 3 wasn't enough and I wanted to get some more variation on the blade. I go in first by actually adding in the brightest or second brightest section first. This makes sure that the position of the highlight looks and feels correct, and then I blend them out. Now I go in where I've added these stripes of bright pale yellow, and I'm blending them out starting with the bright pale green, blending them out into the greens, and then eventually I work my way down to Cobalite, and then all the way down into the deepest colors. So we're just going past each of these bands, slowly smoothing them out, making sure we keep the position correct, and making sure we keep shadows sharp and brights bright. You can see me going back in with the bold titanium white for the brightest, most high part of the reflection, each of those little bands. And then I also have the dark jade to go and hit the darkest shadows and just make sure those stay dark, because we need good contrast here. And then the absolution green here, he comes in, and I'm using this to blend and add just a little more vibrancy to the blends. Make sure this green doesn't get too desaturated. And then finally we reestablish the edge highlight whenever we need it with bold titanium white, pretty much across the whole thing. I also went back on the little back edge of this blade and blended that out as well, to make sure it's not just too big of a flat black surface. Make sure we still get good light variation across this otherwise very smooth surface. We have to simulate and create our own visual interest here. For any of the parts that needed more smoothing into the black, absolution green was generally the way to go. And here was the final result. I liked that I had more color bands. It gave more visual interest, and it wasn't just as simple of a curved edge anymore. With lots of back and forth, you can get a very nice clean result without too much work, just knowing your colors that you want to use and blending them. This next section of the video is going to cover some of the general details, some of the odds and ends that you find across the whole force. For the strap handles on all of the spears that are found on the troops and the horsemen, I used a 1-to-1 contrast mix of Blood Angel's Red and Gore Gruntifer. For the Mortisan Soul Reaper, this fluorescent yellow was used to boost some of the magic bits as well as all the little soul dots on each of his little totems. Using a base coat of white, we get little glow edges on the bottom of these dots as well as the dots themselves, and then we can kind of just glaze the whole area, and this diffuses out naturally because the fluorescent is so thin. Gotta make sure we get those eyeballs too. There we go, decent glow surrounding the eyes and the little totem bits. Gotta make sure we do the same on the troops too, even if it's just a little bit. For the death gems, we're going to take Pterodon Turquoise Contrast and give these a nice base coat after making sure that they have a bright undercoat. We're going to sit and play around with the contrast a little bit to make sure that the contrast pools on each of the faces but leaves the raised edges clearer and lighter. So you can see this already leaves us with a great color and definition for the gems. We're going to push this just a little bit further with that medium blue-gray. If you don't fat finger it like I just did, you can go and you can carefully apply a gentle edge highlight to each of these little facets. It helps to make sure that your brush is very heavily wicked of moisture and that the pigment comes off very smoothly and gently. If you've got messed up lines though, like that, then you can just go and gently reapply the Pterodon Turquoise over the sections where the edge highlight is too fat. A dot highlight of Ulthuan Gray in some of the corners of the facets also helps to give these gems some extra shine. We're getting down to the nitty-gritty here. The model with by far the most individual and unique detail is the Harvester, so we've got to make some special considerations for him. First off, we're going to start with all the glowing glyphs on his blade. I know it's a little hard to see with some of these shots, but we're going to go and we're going to fill these in with diluted white oil paint, thinned down with white spirit so they flow nicely into all of the cracks and crevices. We then take fluoro green, and we're just going to give these a nice base coat, fill those all back in, so that we have that as our nice glowing mid-tone. Afterwards, we're going to take Eldari Emerald. This is a nice dark blue-green. We're actually going to go and carefully outline all of these glyphs so that there is a emanating glow from the fluorescent core of all these glyphs out into a dark green surrounding glow. This is very minimal. We do not need much of this, but when it's done, it looks good and it gives the glyphs a lot better definition. Afterwards, we're going to go in with some very bright pale green, watered down so we can make sure and get it into those glyphs nice and cleanly. We're mainly just trying to flood the center sections. We want to leave a little bit of that fluoro still showing through, and we get a nice gradient. I did the chest glyphs much later than the ones on the blades, and I used a different approach of just doing all the aura glow with fluorescent green. These are much brighter and have much more yellow in them. Let me know which style you like better. Basically, all of the horse constructs had horns or antlers or tusks of some sort, so I went and based these in Gargak Sewer, and then just did a second coat of wildwood contrast on just the tips, blending them a little bit. I did not put a lot of effort into these, but it still looks nice. Then for all the birds on the bannermen for the horsemen, as well as the harvester himself, all got for their beaks a base coat of Yandin yellow over a white base coat, and then they got highlights of Uriel yellow. You can see one of the birds is attached very flimsily to this bone that he's trying to snatch away from the harvester, so he had to be repaired several times. For the eyes of the birds, pretty basic. We go and we dot them in with pure white, and then we're going to give them a wash or two of fluorescent red ink, making sure to really surround the white while still letting the main white core of the eye show through. This is them with a nice basic job done, and it already has a good glow from a distance. For highlighting these guys, some of them leaned more gray, like these gentlemen here I'm doing with just neutral gray. Other ones got a job of Leviathan blue and then Calgar blue. You can see they stand out from each other. Let me know which one you like better. Leviathan blue was used over the Zenithal coat, essentially just straight out of the pot, and then we would go back in and highlight with a Calgar blue. Keeping the highlights tight on some of these feathers in the broader areas helps to give a shiny impression to the otherwise smooth bodies and the feathers of these birds. One of the trickier details to figure out on the harvester was all the gory, bloody bones. I found from the box art that the bones actually had a really yellow hue for them, I guess from the stains of all the different viscera and blood. So I went in with a bony yellow mix of all these colors that you see here, and I dry brushed them to start over all of the bloody bones. Then I took watered down blood for the blood god and gave these guys a gentle glazing, mostly trying to keep to the recesses and just give a gentle stain to the rest. Again, this is very watered down. We're basically getting a recess shade as well as glossing. I then went back in with that same dry brush and picked out more selectively all the raised bits and edges, reestablishing that yellow a little bit while still retaining the blood for the blood god gloss. For this dead arm that is currently being disintegrated so that the bone underneath can be accessed, I went in with Rakarth flesh, Dricky Violet, and then Pallid Witch flesh, which is one of my favorite dead flesh combos. I went back in with the Pallid Witch flesh to get plenty of nice definition and highlights, especially on the bits where the flesh is being sort of pixelated off. We're then going to go in with some of that watered down blood for the blood god, as well as some fire giant orange contrast mixed in. I felt that this would be a good way to get that nice visceral tone with some yellow in it without leaning too far outside of the realm of what could be considered blood. And I thought this achieved chunked, disintegrating meat pretty well. I liked it so much, in fact, that I went back into the bloody bone sections that were already on his back and got these in the deepest recesses, reestablishing some of the gloss, giving some of that extra orange tone, making it just look real nasty, like the meat was just stripped off of these bones. One of the other details on this harvester was the Stormcast Eternal helmet that's being handed up on the side. He was pretty basic as well. He got rich gold from Pro Acryl and then a wash of Reichland Flesh Shade. Nothing too crazy here. And with that, the details for the harvester are all done. Lots of different pieces on here, lots of cool, fun, characterful details. The birds trying to pick at whatever bones they can get, all the little odds and ends, the passing up, the hand, the palm given to the Stormhost helmet, which has no flesh that is usable, is just one of the tastiest parts of this model. Part of why I love the Ossiarch Bonereapers so much. They have so much character. When all of the painting is done, basically the only thing you have left is the basing. I used a hot glue and wax paper method for quickly magnetizing all my troops, just laying the magnets on a grid, giving them a squirt of the hot glue, and while it's still hot, just smush all of the troops back down, let them cool for a little bit, and you've got a decent attachment. You can super glue these afterwards if you want a more secured connection after the fact. Then for the soil, I went and soaked some very diluted mixes of black-brown, mostly black, almost like an asphalt color, mixed with some jet dry, so it has very, very powerful capillary action to just get a nice gray base coat. We're then going in with a brown wash, mostly like dark umbers. I'm going to go and we're going to soak these into random patches on all of the soil to create some variation and start bringing some earth tones back. We're going to hit the pause button on the soil for just a minute and address the rusty sword that is on the harvester's base. We're going to start with a full base coat of Mournfang Brown. Then we're going to go in with Doom Bull, and this is going to be used for some of the darker, more recessed areas up where the blade is underneath the hilt. After that, we're going to go in with a coat of neutral gray to start establishing some of the metal tones, some of the metal that is still exposed. Then after that, we're going to bright neutral gray, being more selective, getting the corners and the most raised edges. This is a very basic non-metallic metal rusty sword, but it works for what we're trying to do. After this, we're going to finish off that soil with black, brown, camo green, and black green. We're going to go and apply all the black green patches of green stuff that might be still sticking through any exposed bits of bases. Again, we're being patchy with this. Same with the black green, we're going to go and start kind of getting some of our mossy areas, trying to keep mostly away from the black brown. And then we're going to go in with camo green, adding this in rough patches, mostly within the black green areas that we just established, but also scattered across the whole thing, largely on the upper raised surfaces. Then we're going to take our secret ingredient, this dirty down moss, and we're going to be applying this in diluted and not so diluted applications across large swaths of many, largely keeping to the green patches of the black green and camo green. We're smearing it on top of some of our glass rocks as well, and then we're letting it cure as it wet blends. We've got some of the moss oxidation effect going on that rock, looking super cool and lichen-y already. While that's curing, we're going to go ahead and take some of the black greens and camo greens, and we're going to go and spot apply these to some of the raised substrate and soil on our troops, as well as our Mortis and Soul Reaper. We're also going to douse these bases with the dirty down moss as well in larger patches so that they're pretty characteristic. We're going to return to the harvester and then get some additional layers of this moss, reinforcing areas where we want more of it and getting it where we want some more, and we're creating patterning, watering down so we get variation in the effect. If there's ever any areas that get too much moss, we can then take our black brown and reestablish some of that soil color, kind of knock that moss and green back a little bit if it ever needs it. I know this is usually the last step in dealing with bases, but I went ahead and I got the bases coated with some nice rims of Rhinox hide just to make sure that we were going in the right direction. Tufts for this project was a little interesting. I tried using these huge miniatures burnt shrub tufts, and they worked okay, but they were a little too dead for the nasty wet swamp that I was going for. I tried these bright blue tufts that I've had forever, but as with many other projects, the tone is just too strong, it just doesn't work, not even with those cobalt blue glass rocks. So eventually, I just got some tufts specifically for them. I got these wild swamp tufts. These are the main event. I also got these tiny dark moss and strong green tufts for my jungle project that's coming up, but I figured I'd use it for these as well to get some variation. Applying the wild swamp tufts first, because these are the main event. This kind of informs me where I want to put the other ones to add some variation of color. The dark moss guys were especially nice at tucking down at the bottom and in the little corners underneath these glass rocks. Applying them all around, I was afraid that I was going to use too many, but honestly, they look too good. These tufts look good on a horseman, but I needed to make sure they were going to translate well on a larger base like the harvester. I started with some of the larger wild clumps, started adding the dark moss and the strong green in, and when I was confident with that, I went ahead and applied them across the entire rest of the force. And with that, our basing and our spearhead was complete. Thank you so much for watching this video. Going through and painting this spearhead over the course of a year was a really big journey for me, but for those of you that have been following along with the reels, I thank you so much for following through the rest of the way and joining me for the completion of this long-awaited project. I've been really happy to get this full project filmed and documented so that I can share it with others, as well as show myself that I can document a full army painting project and video like this. These Ossiarch Bonereapers have captured my heart fully. I might have been afraid of getting sick of them, but honestly, every time I got a chance to really sink my teeth into them, they made me happy every single time. I did get lazy on some bits, like some of the spearheads, but honestly, when they're all as a force together, you barely notice it. I am very excited to be playing with this spearhead on the tabletop, as my little experience with spearhead has been very fun and I've heard nothing but raving reviews about it. If you made it to the end of this video, I appreciate you sitting through the whole thing. I know it's a lot, but I wanted to make sure I covered everything in as much detail as possible. I hope any or all of this tutorial video was helpful and or entertaining for you. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you guys in the next one.